This may in fact be the most bizarre review video I've ever done. Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I will be reviewing the Godspeaker Trilogy by Karen Miller, consisting of Empress, The Riven Kingdom, and Hammer of God. Empress follows the story of Hecate, who starts off the story as a young girl sold into slavery by her parents, basically, and she gets treated really nicely by the slave trader guy, so she doesn't even realize that she's a slave at first. Like, she thinks that she's special, like, he gives her whatever she wants, like, he teaches her stuff, he gets her an education, because she never had an education or anything, and she's clearly very smart, all of that, but obviously that's just him investing in her, so when she finds that out, that she's just a slave, she kills him, and then she goes off to become a warrior, and eventually she marries the warlord, who is basically in charge of the place, all of that, and then she basically tells him that that's what the god wants, and it is in fact what the god wants. Like, she can actually speak to the god, and this is verifiable by other people who can also determine what the god wants. Conveniently, the god also tells her that the warlord cannot have children, and who to have sex with and when to get a child, so that she can pass off the child as the warlord's son, all of that. So she basically, throughout the course of the story, she has two children by two different people, passing them both off as the warlord's sons. So the father of the second son is actually a guy she hates, so she hates her second son. The birth just like wrecked her, and like she's just reminded of that guy. But of course, her second son doesn't know who his father was, like who fathered him. So he doesn't understand why she hates him so much. So that of course turns him into a like terrible, terrible person. So in terms of our story and the pacing of this book and how much I enjoyed it, it was great. I could barely put it down. I listened to it mostly on audiobook, and then whenever I was done doing whatever I was doing while listening to the audiobook, I picked up the book and read from there, because I just couldn't put it down. I didn't want to like read a different book instead or anything like that. Like, it was really good, and I really wanted to find out what happened. Now, a few things took me out of the story. One being that Hecate is plain just bad. There is nothing good about her the entire time. So usually, so this story is basically our villain origin story, pretty much, and she's, you know, a really cruel, terrible villain. But even the cruelest villains usually have something that they care about. There's something that's motivating them to do the bad things that they do. She didn't have anything. There was no complexity to her whatsoever. So her flatness as a character goes even further, because everything she does in this entire book is what the god tells her to do. So she has no wants or desires of her own whatsoever. She literally does every single thing in this book because the god told her to. So that made for a very poor and flat characterization as well. And then also that kind of took me out of the story a little bit as well, because I mean, the entire book was just motivated by a god telling people what to do. The second book, The Riven Kingdom, is equally unputdownable and equally good with like the pacing and the political intrigue. Just it just really, there was no lull in the action. I just flew through this. So we follow our new main character, Rian, who is the daughter of a king who is dying. Her brothers have all died. She's the only one left, and unfortunately in this kingdom, she cannot rule in her own right. She has to get married, and whoever she marries becomes the king. So there's a whole lot of like people trying to each put forward their own candidate for her to choose from, and the guy in charge of the organized religion of this country, because this is a completely different country from where we are in the first book, he is not supposed to have his own candidate, but he is trying to make her pick his nephew, who is basically just going to do whatever he says, pretty much, and he even like beats her up trying to get her to choose his nephew, and she won't. So it's just absolutely insane. So one thing that I really liked is that Rian is actually a lot lot more interesting and more complex and has actual motivations than Hecate, but she is also mostly just a badass chick with not a whole lot to her, but at least she has, you know, she has some reasons for doing the things that she does. She is not motivated by, you know, a higher power and just doing whatever is told to her to do, basically. But we do have another main character, one of her best friends, who is a toy maker guy who's trying to help her out, and he is basically being motivated by a higher power. Like, he is told, you know, by a god to tell a different god to tell him exactly what to do, and that is what mainly is carrying the story here. Like, he's literally told to do something, and then that in turn makes him have to like find a way to help Rianne and all of that. And basically, like, he's literally like told every step of the way, like, you've got to do this, basically. And so we get essentially the same thing, where the story is mostly motivated by a higher power and not by the characters. And I really felt like here there definitely could have been so many, you know, a lot of it really could have been different. It could have been organically motivated. One of our main characters from the first book actually goes to this country, and he's very different. Like, he just experiences such a total culture shock where everything's completely different, and he doesn't speak the language either. And that's in itself a pretty good premise. Like, he thinks that his own reality is the only reality. He goes to another place and he's like, oh, people don't do blood sacrifices here? That's so weird. And all of that, like, everything going on is completely not what he's used to. And so that in itself was a pretty good premise as well, but the way that they have him learning the language is portrayed pretty terribly. So basically, he learns the language as the story goes on. At the beginning of this book, he doesn't know the language at all. So throughout the entire story, all the way to through the third book too, he's still saying yes and no and sorry and stuff like that, like the simple things in his own language, but he somehow knows more complex words all of a sudden at the convenient time. Probably would have been a lot better if he had known their language from the beginning, like maybe he got an education in it like as a kid or something like that. And now onto the third book. This was probably my least favorite, or actually was easily my least favorite, mostly because this is just the culmination of everything else that goes on. So it was just the other two books were the tension. This was just all release, basically. So this is all just them, you know, in the second country that we follow in the second book, them like prepping to defend their kingdom against the first the country from the first book, basically, and that's all that goes on here. So it was pretty good. The political intrigue was done pretty well. For a couple of things, so like overall the pacing wasn't as good, the story wasn't really as good, and I found myself getting a little bored in a couple places, but overall it was still pretty enjoyable. But there were a couple of things that really took me out of the story with this one. Firstly, our main character who goes to that world in the second, or that country in the second book, from the first country, he and Rianne, our main character of the second book, have an attraction which has absolutely nothing to do with the story. It does not carry the plot forward at all whatsoever. She has another love interest and everything. Like, there's nothing, these two have no interactions at all that have anything to do with their attraction to each other, and we never like see it, and people keep bringing it up, and there's no bearing on the plot with that. Like, that has absolutely nothing to do with the plot. That could have been completely left out and it would have been the exact same story. And then it turns out, basically, they find out that the god from the first book, that is followed in that country and that people are able to talk to and be influenced by and all of that and be told what to do by, is not a god but a dark supernatural force, and which is a god. I mean, a supernatural force and a god are pretty much the same thing, right? So who says that's not a god? You know, like, even if it's like evil evil, that doesn't mean it's not a god. Like, I just didn't understand what this book was doing. And then so that really came across to me as like, oh, this other country's religion is wrong, basically. Like, and that is not cool. So, oh, the god is, you know, not a god worth following, but God is the real God who is everywhere. And it's like, no, you know, that just felt way too much like, you know, the religion reminiscent of Christianity telling other religions that they're wrong. It was this book mainly that got way too Christian based for me, in that it was literally telling another religion that they're wrong, and it was just bizarre, and I just don't understand why that was a thing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read this book and have any thoughts on it, or this series and have any thoughts on it, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!